I'm Clara Monroe, 33 years old, an architect living in Portland, Oregon. That evening, I drove more than 2 hours back to my parents' home in Eugene just because my mom said, "It's been so long since we all had dinner together." I brought a bottle of red wine and my dad's favorite dessert, trying to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. But the moment I sat down, the air thickened again just like every family dinner before. Full of half-jokes, cold glances, and words meant to wound but disguised as just teasing. Halfway through the meal, my 9-year-old nephew, Eli, leaned across the table, spat directly onto my plate, and said, loud and clear, "Mom says you deserve it." My mother, Judith, let out a quiet chuckle. My father, Chuck Monroe, laughed even louder. And my sister, Lauren, just shrugged and said, "He's a kid, don't overreact." I set down my fork, looked at each of them, one by one, then stood up. No one stopped me. That night, my father texted, "Don't contact us again." Lauren reacted with a thumbs up. I replied, "Understood. Mortgage auto pay ends tomorrow." At 11:59 p.m., the family group chat exploded. If you've ever had your own family teach others to look down on you, you'll understand why I didn't cry that night. I simply stood up and walked away. Before we go deeper into my story, can you tell me where you're watching from? I'd love to know how far my story travels across the world. Thank you so much for being here. I was born into a family where everything had to be just right. My father, Chuck Monroe, was a civil engineer, a man who believed a person's worth came only from how much they could endure. Lai Tao. My mother, Judith, was a homemaker, gentle on the outside, but someone who lived more for the neighbors' opinions than for the emotions of her own children. I was the firstborn, quiet, disciplined, the kind of child who preferred reading and building models over chatting and showing off. To my father, I was too rational. To my mother, I was hard to love. Then came Lauren. She was everything my parents had always wanted me to be: talkative, cheerful, effortlessly charming. Whenever guests visited, my mother would call out, "Lauren, come say hello. Isn't she just adorable?" And I would stand in the corner, listening to the compliments showered on my sister, as if affection could be measured by applause. A few years later, when I earned a full scholarship to study architecture in Portland, my father simply said, "Impressive, sure. But you need to learn to soften up. Success can't make up for a cold personality." I still remember the tightness in my throat. That sentence branded me cold, and it became their lifelong excuse for never treating me with warmth. Lauren grew up with a kind of confidence that was never questioned. Anything she said was called funny. If I said the same thing, it was inappropriate. When I bought my first car with money from my part-time job, my mother asked, "Don't you think you should help your sister a little? She doesn't have anything yet." So I gave Lauren a few $1,000s. No one ever mentioned it again. From dinners to holidays, every conversation circled around Lauren. My father boasted to relatives about Lauren and her husband's new house project, but never once mentioned that I'd just been promoted. If I spoke up, Lauren would cut in with a half-joking tone. "Clara's always so serious. Probably forgot how to have a normal conversation living alone all the time." Everyone laughed. My father laughed too. And I stayed silent. But what hurt the most wasn't what they said, it was the unspoken agreement, the quiet way my entire family worked together to reinforce one story: that I was the daughter who didn't know how to love, and therefore didn't deserve to be loved. After graduation, I returned to Portland and began working for a major architecture firm. Every year, I sent my mother a birthday gift. I transferred money to my father whenever he mentioned being a little tight financially, and more than once, I helped Lauren pay off her credit card debt after she quit another job. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because I thought if I just kept giving, maybe they'd still see me as part of the family. But to them, every act of help was simply my duty. Once, after I sent money to help my mother cover hospital bills, her only message back was, "You should teach Lauren how you manage money, she's so clumsy with it." No thank you. No. How have you been? Just a new reminder of where I stood. That same year, I bought my first apartment in Portland. At dinner, my father said, "Good, at least you have a place to live now. But don't think material things are everything. Lauren may not have much, but she knows how to love." Though, everyone at the table nodded in agreement. I smiled and swallowed the lump in my throat. For a long time, I told myself that if I was patient enough, worked hard enough, maybe they would finally see me differently. But, over time, I realized they didn't want to see me. They only wanted the version of me they could control. That was when a small crack inside me began to spread. Not because I was jealous of Lauren, but because I understood something painful. That in my family, love always came with conditions. Lauren was always the daughter who knew how to make people smile. She married at 24, to Kyle, a charming, well-dressed finance guy with the kind of charisma my parents adored. The wedding took place at a vineyard in Oregon. I still remember standing in the back, camera in hand, smiling as my father raised his glass and said before hundreds of guests, "Lauren is the pride of this family. She has a heart full of love and a perfect home." I pressed the shutter, capturing the moment, and smiled a smile only I knew was painfully forced. 2 years later, Lauren gave birth to Eli. It was as if a new son had risen in the family. My mother practically moved in with her, tending to every bottle, every nap, every tiny sneeze. Every phone call began the same way. "Eli was so adorable today. That boy just knows how to make people love him." No one ever asked how I was doing. If I was eating properly. If I was sleeping at all after those long nights at the firm. What I didn't know was that while I was trying to maintain a polite distance, Lauren had already begun planting poison in her son's mind. I learned about it later through a few casual words from my mother. "The poor boy, he's terrified of you, Clara. Lauren says you're a bit cold, not really fond of kids." She laughed as if it were a harmless joke, but I knew that to a child, words like that become permanent ink on their perception. Ever since preschool, Eli had heard the same story over and over. "Aunt Clara is always cold, doesn't care about anyone. Without her, your grandparents would be happier." Oh? And little by little, he came to believe it. That I was the reason his grandparents were tired, that I made his mother unhappy, that I was somehow responsible for the family's constant sense of lack. My father, as always, stayed silent, dismissing it as just small family stuff. But it was that very silence that allowed the small things to grow monstrous. When Eli turned 7, I sent him a birthday gift, a miniature city building set. I knew he loved architecture, and I wanted to share a piece of my own passion with him. Lauren texted me a short thank you. "He doesn't need more toys, but thanks anyway." Later, my mother told me that Lauren had said to Eli, "Aunt Clara only sends expensive gifts to show off, not because she cares about you." And just like that, in the mind of a child, my image became darker still. Yet, I stayed patient. I kept sending Christmas presents, birthday cards, even helped cover part of his summer camp tuition. Not because I was trying to buy affection, but because I believed that consistent kindness could outlast prejudice. But I forgot one thing. When a child is raised on contempt, there's no space left inside them to receive love. When Kyle Lauren's husband made a bad investment and went bankrupt, everything began to crumble. Lauren called me in tears, her voice trembling. "Clara, we're in trouble. I just need a little money to keep the house for now, it's only temporary." I didn't ask questions. I transferred $15,000. She texted back, "Thank you, you're so kind." But a few weeks later, my mother mentioned that Lauren had told the neighbors, "Clara only did it to prove she's better than everyone else." Honestly, I don't think she really cares about anyone. I wasn't surprised anymore. But when I heard my mother say that Eli had proudly told his grandmother, "Aunt Clara just pretends to be nice. Mom says she's really selfish," that was the moment I realized it had gone too far. He was 9 years old. And he said it with the calm detachment of someone describing a villain from a movie. In his eyes, I was no longer the aunt who had held him as a baby, or the one who used to sneak candy into his backpack. I had become the bad one in his mother's story. I thought about confronting Lauren directly, but I stopped myself. Because I knew no matter what I said, she'd twist my words into proof that I was arrogant. My father still visited Lauren's house regularly. He praised Kyle for getting back on his feet, praised Lauren for managing everything so well, and once told me over the phone, "You should take a page from your sister's book. Don't bury yourself in work all the time." I just replied, "Okay." That single word "okay" after all these years had become the only shield I had left. Looking back, I can see it now. Everything unfolded like a carefully crafted plan passed down through 3 generations. My mother taught Lauren that love is a reward, not a right. Lauren taught her son that belittling others is how you prove you're loved. And my father, with his steadfast silence, kept the entire cycle running smoothly. I, the one who once believed that being good enough would earn me acceptance, slowly realized I was merely the mirror they used to define their own worth. The more successful I became, the more insecure they felt, and they turned that insecurity into jokes, into bedtime stories told to a growing child. It was November. A light drizzle slipped through the damp branches of Eugene, blurring the golden streetlights outside my parents' house. I sat in my car for nearly 5 minutes, staring at the familiar home where I once ran around in rubber boots with a chocolate milk carton in hand. The house looked exactly the same. Only I had changed. Mom had said, "It's my birthday, everyone's coming. If you don't, I'll be so disappointed." I almost said no. But as always, I gave in, telling myself, "Just a few hours, you can handle it." When I walked in, Lauren was already there wearing a tight red dress, drenched in perfume, smiling as if life had always been kind. Kyle sat beside her, scrolling through his phone. Eli sat across the table, folding a napkin into a paper airplane. My father, Chuck Monroe, was pouring wine for my mother. His eyes flickered briefly when he saw me. "You made it," he said. "Good. Portland must be keeping you busy these days?" I smiled. "Same as always, Dad." I sang. The dinner table gleamed under candlelight, covered in all the dishes my mother loved to show off. Smoked ham, mashed potatoes, toasted garlic bread. The air buzzed with chatter but felt empty, like everyone was reading from a script they'd recited too many times before. I quietly sliced my meat, listening to my mother and Lauren laughing. Lauren was describing her recent spiritual healing trip to Arizona, talking about positive energy and how the universe favors those who love freely. My mother nodded approvingly, as though she were listening to a philosopher. Then suddenly, Lauren turned toward me, her voice sweet but sharp as a razor. "I guess in Portland, people are just like you, love their work more than they love people, huh?" The table went silent for a beat. My mother adjusted her napkin. My father took a sip of wine, avoiding my eyes. I set my fork down and said calmly, "I just choose to love the life I've built, instead of living by someone else's design." The air froze. Lauren's cheeks flushed, her smile stiffened. My father intervened, his tone heavy. "Clara, don't lecture your sister. It's your mother's birthday, not a debate night." I was only answering her question, "Dad." Lauren gave a small laugh, pouring herself more wine. Her voice was syrupy, mocking. "It's fine, Dad. She's just used to thinking everyone else is dumber than her." My mother tried to change the subject. "Eat, dear. The ham's getting cold." I was about to stay quiet. But then, Eli lifted his head from the paper airplane he'd been folding. His eyes narrowed sharp, unblinking. There was something chillingly adult in that look. He set his fork down, leaned slightly toward me. For a second, I thought he was about to ask me something. He didn't. A sharp snap broke the silence, then the soft, wet sound of spit landing on my plate. "Mom says you deserve it." The room shattered. I couldn't breathe. Time seemed to stop in that sickening, echoing sound. My father laughed, first low, short, deliberate. My mother followed, covering her mouth with her napkin. Lauren feigned shock. "Eli, why would you do that?" but her eyes flickered with satisfaction, like her son had just spoken the truth she'd always wanted to say aloud. I looked around the table, faces I had known all my life. Suddenly strangers, terrifying in their familiarity. My mother avoided my gaze. My father shook his head, still smirking. "Clara, don't make a big deal out of it. He's just a kid." I slowly put down my knife and fork. My hands trembled not from anger, but from the hollow ache spreading inside me. I looked at Eli. He didn't flinch. If anything, he looked proud, like he was carrying out a duty. In that moment, I didn't see a child anymore. I saw 3 generations of contempt colliding in that single, chilling stare. I saw the mother who taught her child that kindness was weakness. I saw the father who taught the family that silence was strength. And I saw myself, the fool who once believed that being good enough would earn me love. My voice came out low, steady, almost too calm. Maybe the saddest thing here isn't that a child was disrespectful, but that the adults taught him to think this way. No one spoke. Lauren pressed her lips together. My mother lowered her head. My father set his glass down, his tone sharp. "Don't overreact, Clara. It's just childish behavior." "If this is childish," I said quietly, "then the adults here have forgotten how to be human." I pushed my chair back. The screech of wood against wood echoed through the silence. "Thank you for dinner, Mom. Happy birthday." I turned and walked toward the hallway. Behind me, I heard my mother's faint voice. "Clara, don't go." But there was no conviction in it, no intention to stop me. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving only the bite of cold air against my shoulders. I stepped down the porch stairs, opened my car door, but didn't start the engine right away. Through the window, the dining room still glowed in warm yellow light. The silhouettes inside moved as if nothing had happened. As if I had never been there. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just whispered to myself, "If they can teach a child to despise me, then I can teach myself to leave." The car rolled forward, tires hissing over the wet pavement. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller, dimmer until it was just a fading speck of light swallowed by the night. I didn't know it then. But that was the moment I closed an entire chapter of my life. The one I used to call family. That night, the rain in Portland came down hard. By the time I pulled into the parking garage, it was past 9. My shoes were soaked through. Rain mixed with tears, but no one would ever know which came first. I hung my coat on the rack and turned on the kitchen light. The white glow spilled across the cold stainless steel counter, reflecting my face, blank, emotionless. Not angry. Not sad. Just tired. I hadn't even made tea yet when my phone buzzed. "Dad. Don't contact us again." A short message. New punctuation, new emotion. Like a business memo. Seconds later, Lauren reacted with a thumbs-up emoji. I stood there, staring at the pale blue screen. A part of me wanted to type something long to explain, to defend myself, to make them see. But the other part, the one that had lived too long in silence, just typed 8 words. Understood. Mortgage auto pay ends tomorrow. I hit send. Didn't wait. Didn't regret. 5 minutes later, the phone rang. Dad. I looked at the screen, let it ring until the end. Didn't pick up. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. Under automatic payments, a list appeared. Monroe Family Mortgage. Utilities. Comcast Internet. Lauren Vehicle Insurance. Each line was a scar. A moment I'd once said, "It's okay, I'll handle it." I clicked each one, canceling them one by one. Every time the confirmation popped up, auto payment canceled successfully. My chest felt a little lighter, even as the ache lingered. The phone buzzed again. Lauren. You're destroying this family. Dad. Your mother's crying. Hi. Lauren. You're making Mom sick. I just stared at the messages. Didn't respond. Because I knew they weren't crying because I left. They were crying because they'd lost the one who paid the bills. Outside, the rain pounded harder, drumming against the window like it was demanding to be let in. I turned off my phone and set it on the table. In the small apartment, only two sounds remained: the kettle coming to a boil and the soft tick of the wall clock, marking the first quiet night I had truly owned. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat down, and opened the sketchbook I'd carried with me since college. On the very first page was the first drawing I ever finished: my dream house. Small, with a window overlooking a maple tree, and a single rule: no one was allowed to raise their voice. I traced the lines of the sketch with my pen and whispered to myself, I once paid the price through silence, now it's their turn to taste it. Not silence born of fear, but silence that draws a final line. That night, before going to bed, I opened the old group chat, Family Monroe. Dozens of new messages flooded the screen: accusations, guilt trips, and the familiar chorus of, "You're so cruel." I scrolled all the way to the top, to the pinned photo from last Christmas. I was in the corner, smiling awkwardly. Lauren stood in the center, holding a glass of wine, and my parents looked at her with pride. That photo used to make me feel lonely. But tonight, looking at it again, I finally saw it clearly. I was never really in that picture. I pressed leave group. A small pop-up appeared. Are you sure you want to leave this chat? I clicked yes. The window disappeared, leaving a blank white space on the screen. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and listened to the rain outside blending with the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. For the first time in years, no message startled me. No one asked for anything. No one demanded, no one accused. There was only quiet. And in that quiet, I finally understood. I hadn't just left the family. I had escaped it. Not with a slammed door, but with an 8-word message. Soft, simple, yet sharp enough to sever every string that had bound me for a lifetime. The next morning, I went to my usual cafe on Burnside Avenue. The air was still damp from the rain, but it felt lighter somehow. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by the sound of notifications. My phone was silent, and I wanted it that way. I texted Tessa, my best friend from college, now an accountant for a major firm in Seattle. Got time this afternoon? I need to clean house, and not the literal kind. She replied almost instantly. If you mean financial cleaning, I'm bringing my laptop. That afternoon, Tessa showed up with her tablet, an iced coffee, and that familiar face of someone too used to rescuing me from the messes I always postponed. All right, she said, pulling out a chair and opening her files. Start from the top. What are you paying for without realizing it? I gave a small laugh. Probably more than I think. We started with my main bank account. Each line of payment appeared like a small incision. Tessa read them aloud while I could only sit there, smiling faintly. Electric bill, your parents' house. Comcast internet, Ogina address. Car insurance, Lauren. Netflix premium, Disney Plus, and... She paused, raising an eyebrow. Summer tuition, Eli's camp evergreen payment. Clara, this one's several $1,000s. I stayed quiet for a long time. The glow of the screen reflected my own eyes colder than I remembered. I guess they still see me as their sponsor, I said evenly. No, Tessa replied, typing quickly. They see you as a walking wallet. She created a spreadsheet, her fingers flying across the keys. Roughly, in the last 2 years, you've spent almost $46,000 on them. And that's not counting the mortgage loan you're co-paying. You're basically their accountant and their ATM combined. I let out a dry, paper-thin laugh. And they're the most loyal clients I've ever had. Except they never pay the bill. That line made Tessa stop and look at me for a long moment. You know, she said softly, I used to think you were just good at controlling your emotions. But now I see you've just been living on auto-endure mode. She wasn't wrong. I opened my wallet and pulled out a spare debit card, the one I'd once given my mother for emergencies. I snapped it in half and dropped it into my cold coffee. The crack was soft, almost delicate. But it sounded like a door quietly closing. We kept going, line by line. Tessa canceled the Disney Plus, Netflix, Spotify, family accounts, everything's still linked to the Eugene address. Each time she pressed cancel, she glanced at me. How do you feel now? About a pound lighter with every click. She smiled. Then by tomorrow, you might just float. When we reached the last one, Lauren's car insurance, she paused. This one's tricky. You co-signed the policy, you'll need her signature to get out. I sighed. She won't sign it. But send the request anyway. I don't want a single thread left tying me back. Got it, it might take a few weeks. That's fine, this time, I'm waiting for me. 1. We worked through the entire afternoon. By the end, my account felt strangely empty, but it was the kind of emptiness that lets you breathe again. Tessa closed her laptop, stretched, and squinted at me. Do you realize something, Clara? They trained you to help automatically without ever asking. But now, you're rewriting your own code. I laughed, pouring another cup of coffee. That sounds like something from a therapy poster. She grinned. No, it's simple math. Bad investments have consequences, even when those investments are people. Outside, the sky had dimmed. Sunset light streamed through the cafe window, glinting across the table. The laptop now dark, its screen smooth and still, like a quiet lake. Tessa packed up her things, but before she left, she rested a hand on my shoulder. Don't see today as the day you lost your family. See it as the day you got yourself back. When she left, I stayed seated for a long while. Portland glowed outside traffic, humming, city lights flickering. I turned on my phone. No new messages. No one asking for money. No reminders. Just space. And a stillness that finally fit inside my chest. That night, when I got home, I started tidying up. I took down the framed family photo from the wall, the one I'd kept believing it proved they'd once loved me. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "For you, the one who always carries the weight." I smiled faintly, set the frame down, and tucked it away in a drawer with the old receipts. Then I showered. Hot water streamed over my shoulders, washing away the residue of exhaustion. When I turned off the lights, the room went perfectly still, as if no one had ever lived there before. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully, no ringing, no messages, no guilt over finally resting. And in that sleep, I knew I had truly cleaned house, not just theirs, but the one inside my own heart. A week later, when Portland had just shaken off its first winter rain, my phone rang. The caller ID said, "Dad." I stared at the glowing screen for a few seconds before sliding my thumb to answer. On the other end came his low, heavy voice. "What you did was cruel, Clara. Your mother can't handle it. She's been crying for days." I took a deep breath. "What exactly did I do, Dad?" "You cut off all the payments, canceled the insurance, stopped helping. Family is supposed to rely on each other, you know that." I let out a quiet laugh. Not amused, just that bitter kind of laugh you give when you hear something too hollow to even argue with. Rely on each other? Is that what you call it? When I pay the internet, the electric bills, and my nephew's tuition and no one even remembers to say thank you? His tone hardened. "Don't talk to me like that, your mother's heartbroken." I closed my eyes, letting a few seconds stretch between us. A silence heavy enough to feel like truth itself. Then, slowly, deliberately, I said, "Do you remember that night, Dad? When Eli spat into my plate and you laughed?" Silence. All I could hear was his breathing, short, uneven. "The boy was just copying the adults," he said finally, forcing calm into his voice. "He didn't understand what he was doing. You shouldn't break up the family over something so small." "No," I said softly, voice steady, but cold. "He wasn't copying. He believed his parents, and he believed you." A long pause followed, dense as fog, heavy as regret. I heard him sip water on the other end, maybe trying to collect his thoughts. But this time, he couldn't find a single excuse clean enough to hide behind the truth. I continued, my voice steady, each word slicing slowly, precisely, like the edge of a knife. "You say it was a small thing, but to me, It was the result of years. Years of you staying silent while they mocked me. Years of you allowing them to teach a child that his aunt was someone to despise. You're twisting this. No, Dad, I'm just remembering it right. He drew in a long breath, then exhaled heavily. A sigh that sounded more like surrender than reflection. You've always seen yourself as the victim. I didn't respond. I let him speak. This family isn't perfect, he went on, his tone softer, pleading almost. But you're not easy to live with either. Your mother loves you, she just doesn't know how to show it. Lauren has a temper. You have to learn to be more forgiving. I gave a faint, tired laugh. Forgiving doesn't mean letting people trample you, Dad. I've spent my entire youth forgiving. But I'm tired now. His voice cracked a little, fragile and uneven. I don't want to lose you, Clara. I just don't know how to keep you. I gripped the phone tighter, feeling something between ache and detachment. You don't have to keep me, Dad. You just have to remember. Silence is also a choice. And you chose the other side, not me. A sharp exhale came through the line, then the call ended. No goodbye. No closing words. I sat there, motionless, watching the screen fade to black. In the small apartment, the only sounds were the wind whistling against the window frame and the hum of a dim light spilling pale across the wall. My chest felt hollow but lighter than before. For the first time, I understood. My father's silence had never been weakness. It was a choice. He chose peace over truth. He chose to laugh, rather than face what he'd allowed to happen. And I, who had spent years enduring, afraid of being the one to break the family, finally realized that the family had already been broken long ago. I was just the one still trying to pick up the shards, cutting my own hands without noticing. I stood up and poured myself a glass of water. The apartment was silent. No voices, no accusations, no pretended affection. Outside the window, Portland stretched beneath a haze of dim city lights. Raindrops clung to the glass, reflecting the glow like distant stars. And softly, almost in a whisper, I said to myself, I don't need them to hear me anymore, I just need to hear myself clearly, for the first time. That night, I worked late. I opened the unfinished design for my new project, lines appearing crisp and bold across the screen. I realized that in my work, at least everything had structure, reason, and direction. Unlike family, where right and wrong were constantly distorted by fake affection. I put on soft music. The sound of a guitar filled the apartment, weaving through the stillness. No father's voice. No mother's sigh. No Lauren. Just me and the quiet rhythm of my own breathing. Steady, calm, free. Then, one March afternoon, Portland lay under a thin veil of fog, cold as smoke. I was in the middle of sketching plans for a community center when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my hand stop midair. Lauren. I stared at it for a long time. It had been over a month since the call with my father. And this was the first time her name had appeared again. The message was short. No greeting. No emojis. Eli has a heart condition. He needs emergency surgery. Please help. The pen slipped from my fingers. My chest tightened an instinct, a reflex, even as my mind tried to close every door. I read it again. Then again, trying to understand whether this was real. Or just another way to pull me back in. I didn't reply right away. I just sat there, listening to the dry, rhythmic ticking of the clock echo through the room. Inside me, two voices wrestled. One cold, detached reminded me I no longer owed them anything. The other quiet, steady, and still me whispered that the boys shouldn't have to suffer for the sins of the adults. I brewed a cup of tea and watched the steam curl upward like smoke. Then I opened my laptop and typed the name of the hospital mentioned in the message. Sacred Heart Medical Center, Eugene. No hesitation, no questions. I called the hospital's billing department directly. A gentle female voice answered. Yes, patient Eli Monroe. He's scheduled for heart surgery next week. The family needs to pay a portion of the cost before we can proceed. I took a deep breath and said clearly, I'll cover 40% of the cost paid directly to the hospital. Not through anyone else. She confirmed and sent me the invoice by email. I filled in the payment details, signed my name, and when the screen flashed "payment successful," I closed my eyes for a long moment. There was no sense of triumph in it. Only the quiet peace that comes from doing what's right. Not to atone, but to end the cycle of harm. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Mom. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me pressed answer. Her voice was frail, trembling, as if it took everything in her to say the words. I heard you helped Eli. Thank you, Clara. I was wrong. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, silent for a few seconds. Those words "I was wrong" drifted through my mind like a soft breeze through an old door. Weak, but real. It's okay, Mom, I just want him to get better. She paused, then said quietly. He asks about you a lot. When he's well, you should come visit. We'll see, Mom. I'm not ready yet. I understand. For the first time, she didn't try to persuade me, didn't guilt trip or defend herself. Just those two simple words. I understand. And, somehow, that small phrase made my chest feel lighter. The next afternoon, I received an email from my father. Just one line. I was wrong too. No explanation. No signature. But I knew he must have wrestled with his pride for weeks just to type those 4 words. I sat quietly in front of the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, but I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Those words, though late, couldn't erase the old wounds. But they did something else. They cracked the door open just enough. For a little truth to finally find its way in. That night, I walked across the Burnside Bridge. The city lights shimmered, and the Willamette River below caught them like scattered shards of glass. I thought of Eli, the boy who learned how to despise before he ever learned how to apologize, and wondered if, in the haze of pain after surgery, he might somehow begin to understand. I didn't want his gratitude. I only wanted him to have a chance to become someone different. Someone his parents never taught him how to be. Someone capable of love. When I got home, I opened my sketchbook and wrote on the last page. Compassion isn't surrender. It's choosing to walk away without becoming what broke you. I closed the book, turned off the light, and let the room sink into quiet. And in that stillness, I realized I was no longer the girl who sat at the dinner table, trying to earn her family's approval. I was someone who had finally learned how to give, without losing herself in the process. Those 2 admissions, I'm sorry, and I was wrong. They weren't enough to repair anything. But to me, they were light as air. Enough to know that for the first time, they had stopped running long enough to face themselves. And that, for me, was the first step toward truth. One morning in late April, sunlight spilled softly over Portland. When I returned from the office, I noticed a small brown package sitting by my front door. There was no sender listed. Just 2 handwritten words in blue ink on the label. For Clara. I brought it into the kitchen and carefully peeled back the layers of tape. Inside was a stack of old photographs, their edges yellowed with time. The faint scent of old paper and the familiar wooden frames made me freeze for a moment. The first photo was from Christmas 1998. Me with my hair in a ponytail, wearing a red sweater. Smiling brightly beside the small Christmas tree I had decorated myself. My father stood behind, his arm around my mother. And Lauren, just 10 years old, leaned her head to the side, grinning sweetly, her cheek dusted with flour. I turned to the next photo, me holding a certificate on graduation day, my parents standing on either side. I remembered that day vividly. They had said, "You're such a smart girl, but don't let your intelligence make you arrogant." Oh, a sentence that sounded harmless at the time. But for years, it convinced me that no matter how hard I tried, I would never be good enough to be loved. I shuffled through the stack of photos until my fingers brushed against a neatly folded sheet of paper tucked between 2 frames. The handwriting slanted and familiar was my father's, but the ink had bled at the edges, as if the paper had once been wet with tears. Clara, you didn't deserve to be treated that way. We're sorry not just for that dinner, but for the many years we made you feel like you didn't belong in your own family. Your mother said that when she saw you pay Eli's hospital bill, she realized that silence can hurt just as deeply as words. It took me longer to understand. But I do now. We can't go back, but I hope you'll let time heal what's left. Dad and Mom. End of chapter. I set the letter down and looked at it the way you look at an old wound after the bandage finally comes off. No longer bleeding, but still tender to the touch. I took a deep breath, then continued sorting through the box. At the bottom was a smaller envelope, scrawled in uneven, childish handwriting. For Aunt Clara. I opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing made with colored pencils. A woman with brown hair, clearly meant to be me, holding hands with a boy standing in the middle of a hospital, a large red heart drawn on his chest. Below it, in shaky, misspelled letters, were the words, "Thank you for saving me. I'm sorry, love, Eli." I couldn't hold it in. Tears spilled, falling onto the drawing, blurring a corner of the tiny red heart. I wiped it quickly, terrified of ruining the one thing in that box that felt pure. The only thing born from genuine remorse. Sitting there in the kitchen, I thought about all the years behind me. The times I stayed silent, afraid of losing what I thought was family. The times I justified their cruelty, believing that love meant endurance. And now, I finally understood. Forgiveness doesn't begin with the ones who hurt you. It begins with the one brave enough to stop carrying the hate. I don't know if Lauren truly feels remorse. I don't know if my parents sent that box out of guilt or just to ease their own hearts. But I do know this: Eli, the child who once spat into my plate, taught me something none of the adults around him ever could. That kindness, even when twisted and bruised, can still survive. As long as someone is willing to give it a second chance. I opened a drawer, took out an empty picture frame, and gently placed Eli's drawing inside. It wasn't perfect, the lines were uneven, the colors smudged. But maybe that was what made it real. I set the frame on the windowsill, where the afternoon light poured in, and the little red heart in the drawing glowed with a quiet warmth. A breeze drifted through the open window, scattering a few of the old photos onto the floor. I bent down to gather them. In one, I was smiling as Lauren, barely a toddler, clung to me, my face full of joy. And it struck me. I had loved them once, not because they deserved it, but because I had always believed love was the only way to survive. Now, I still love. But I no longer need them to understand that. I love quietly, softly, like breathing. Without debt, without expectation. I folded my parents' letter and slipped it back into its envelope, sealing it shut. On the outside, I wrote a single line. "Thank you for telling the truth. I'm learning to forgive little by little." I haven't sent it. I haven't called. I haven't written back. I just placed the envelope inside my desk drawer, beside the blueprints for my new project. A community center for people who, like me, had been hurt by the ones who were supposed to love them. As I looked at the photos, the letter, and Eli's drawing, I realized the past was still there. But it was no longer an open wound. It was proof that I had survived. And that I could still be gentle, even after being taught to be hard. Outside, Portland began to glow. The sunset spread across my window, touching the small frame. The heart in Eli's drawing caught the light. Not bright, but warm. And in that moment, I smiled. For the first time, not for anyone else, but for myself. One Saturday morning, Portland was covered in a thin veil of mist, soft as paper, when my phone rang. The caller ID said Dad. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. His voice came low, trembling slightly, like someone who had rehearsed all morning just to say the words. "I'm in Eugene this week. If you're free, would you have lunch with me?" I stayed silent, my hand wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Finally, I said, "All right, but lunch only. No talking about the past." "Howard Town." "I understand," he replied quietly. We met at a small restaurant by the Willamette River. I arrived early and sat by the window. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The old jacket, more gray in his hair, his steps slower, his posture slightly bent. He looked at me, smiled softly, and took the seat across from mine. "Thank you for coming. You invited me," I said simply. The server brought out 2 plates of salad and toasted bread. Neither of us touched the food. The air between us hovered familiar, yet distant. After a long silence, he placed his hand on the table, speaking as if afraid the words might break. "I used to think silence kept the peace. But I've learned that silence is what broke the family." I looked at him. "You're not the only one who thought that." He nodded faintly, eyes fixed on his glass of water. That night, when Eli did what he did, I laughed. Not because I found it funny, but because I was ashamed and afraid. All line. "Afraid of what?" I asked, my tone calm. "Afraid you'd explode. Afraid of a scene. Afraid of losing control." I spent my whole life believing that order was the same as safety, Clara. But that night I realized, that order was built on your silence. The words hit deep, a dull ache spreading through my chest. I had never heard my father admit something like that before. He took a sip of water, his voice lower now. "Your mother said that if you had stayed silent a little longer, we might have lost you forever. And she's right." I rested my hand on the table and spoke slowly. "I don't need you to be perfect, Dad. I don't even need you to apologize for everyone else. I just need you to stop laughing when I'm being humiliated." He looked up then. His eyes were red, but for the first time, he didn't look away. "I understand. And I'm sorry. Not just for that night, but for all the years I said nothing." Something in the air softened between us, as if someone had quietly opened a window and let the wind breathe through. Neither of us cried. Neither of us tried to fix what couldn't be fixed. We just sat there, eating a late lunch. 2 people who had once been strangers in the same house, learning, at last, how to speak like ordinary human beings. When the meal ended, he said, "Eli's doing better now." He asked me, "Does Aunt Clara forgive me?" I told him, "You don't need to forgive him yet, only to see that he's trying." I smiled faintly. "You're right. Forgiveness isn't a gift, it's a process." We left the restaurant together. Before parting, he paused and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for still coming, Clara. I thought I'd run out of chances." I met his eyes and said, "Chances don't disappear, Dad. They just change owners." "Do." He nodded, gave a small, weary smile, and turned to go. I watched him walk away, his figure growing smaller against the river wind. And for the first time, there was no pride left in his stride. Only truth. A week later, my mother called. Her voice was warmer this time, tired, but gentle. "Your father's planning to sell the house in Eugene. He wants to move closer to you, maybe somewhere around Beaverton. He says the air in Portland feels better for old folks." Howling. I stayed quiet for a few seconds before asking, "Does he really want that?" "Yes," she said softly. "He told me, we don't need to live together, just knowing my daughter is in the same city is enough." I let out a small laugh, though my throat tightened. "So you called me to ask what I think?" "No," she replied. "I called to ask you for something." "What is it, Mom?" "When we move up there, have dinner with me. Just one meal. No celebration, no reason, just dinner. One." I took a deep breath, looking out the window. Portland was draped in a gentle rain, droplets sliding slowly down the glass, reflecting the faint gold of the streetlights. "Just one meal, Mom," I said quietly. On the other end, she laughed softly, her voice trembling, yet warm. "One meal is a good beginning, sweetheart." After the call, I sat still for a long time. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because of the strange feeling that something was shifting, as if the wall that had stood between us for so many years was finally cracking. Not collapsing. Just enough for the light to seep through. That evening, I opened the cupboard and took out the old photo box and Eli's drawing. I placed them both on the dining table, the same table that had sat silent for far too long. I lit a small candle and watched the flame flicker against the paper heart. And in that moment, I understood. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about accepting that you survived it and can still smile after. And maybe, just maybe, a simple meal could be the place where everything begins again. From truth. And from the quiet courage of those who finally found the words to say, I was wrong. So was I. But you're still here. That afternoon, I drove 3 hours from Portland to Bend, where my parents had just moved. The road wound through snow-dusted hills, the last rays of sunlight cutting across the pine forest. Golden, still. Almost unreal in its peace. I didn't know what the feeling in my chest was. Nervousness or calm. Maybe both. Their new house sat on the edge of town small, with a brown wooden roof and lavender pots blooming on the porch. It wasn't fancy, not polished, but there was something warmer about it than any home I'd ever stepped into before. When I parked the car, the front door opened. Mom stood there in a linen apron, smiling gently, no longer timid, no longer guarded. Dad was just behind her, his hair whiter, his posture smaller, but his eyes softer, more human. And then Lauren, the sister I once thought would never look me in the eye again, stepped out from the kitchen, towel in hand. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. Her voice was small, but honest. Dinner took place in a small dining room, warm light glowing over the oak table. No one tried to sound cheerful. No one brought up the past. Just simple conversation about work, the weather, my new project in Portland. When dessert came, Lauren set down her spoon, took a breath, and looked straight at me. You probably won't believe me, she said, but I'm truly sorry. Not just for that night, but for all the years I let my son look at you with the same eyes that should have been turned toward me. The room fell still. Mom covered her mouth, trembling. Dad bowed his head, saying nothing. I looked at Lauren and saw no trace of the arrogance that used to fill her gaze. You made me believe I wasn't worthy of love, I said softly. But if you're brave enough to say you're sorry today, then maybe I don't hate you anymore. On. Lauren nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks, and for once she didn't wipe them away. Dad stood and stepped out for a moment. When he returned, he held a small key tied to a silver string. He set it gently on the table in front of me. I don't know if you want this, he said, but it's the house key. You can come or go. Whatever you choose, I'll respect it. I stared at the key. It was small but heavy, like a confession. A silent way of saying that he finally understood. Freedom, too, is a kind of love. When I was about to leave for Portland, Eli ran out onto the porch, clutching a yellow card he'd made himself. Here, Aunt Clara. I made this at school. It's for you. I opened it. Inside was his careful handwriting, tidier than before. Thank you for teaching me how to be kind. I knelt down, ruffling his hair, smiling through the sting in my eyes. I didn't teach you that, Eli, I said softly. You chose what's right all on your own. He grinned, pure and genuine, and in that moment, I no longer saw the reflection of the past in his eyes. Only innocence. And the beginning of something new. Before I left, Mom hugged me. It was slow, awkward, but no longer distant. I don't know what to say except thank you, she whispered. One meal was a good start. Yes, Mom, I said. And we'll have more beginnings if we learn how to keep them. That night, I drove back to Portland. The city was glowing. I sat on my balcony, watching the sunset fade across the Willamette River. The wind carried the scent of damp wood, and for the first time, I felt no anger left inside me. The voice that once trembled with fear of rejection was now calm, steady. I used to think leaving was betrayal, I whispered. But sometimes, leaving is the only way to save what's still good. I closed my eyes, letting the wind move through my hair. Inside me was an emptiness not from loss, but from finally making space for something better to grow. And now, to you. Have you ever been made the villain in your own family's story? Have you ever been taught that silence was love, even while your heart was breaking? If so, remember this. Walking away doesn't make you selfish. It makes you honest with yourself. Share your story below. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next video.